This has taken forever to get out and I'm really sorry, but finally I'm getting it out. It's the summer, you guys are going to be wanting to take photos, and as you know, I'm the king of budget. I like to do things on a budget and I like to get the most out of each product that I use. So hey guys, my name is Ryan Thomas with Failtech, and this, a long time in the making, is how to get the most out of your smartphone camera. I've decided to do this in one larger video. If anyone really wants a long form guide, then I'll happily do that, but I'm going to want some interaction. I'm going to want someone to actually outspeak that they want that, because otherwise it just seems like a bit of a waste of time. Let's get started. You really do need to learn your smartphone. Use something like GSM Arena to find the specs for your phone's camera, and also just to deep dive into your phone. Find your microphones, as in physically look into the device and find whether you're covering up microphones or not when recording video, and also find out which is the most ergonomic way to hold your phone, whether you have off-screen buttons or not. Also, find out more about your settings and see if you can use image stabilization, because that makes a huge difference to your footage and even photos. Also, to save battery, by default, phone cameras will come at a lower resolution. So say you've got a 12 megapixel sensor, your phone might default to 8 megapixel. Or if you've got one of those phones with a larger display that covers the whole screen in a bezel-less design, your phone will likely default to cover the whole viewfinder and not the whole sensor. So that's one thing to recommend. Go into the settings, especially in the stock camera app, and look for the best settings possible and try to use those. For example, a lot of iPhones default to a slightly lower resolution and frame rate than they're actually capable of. And one really important thing that a lot of people overlook, and I almost overlooked this, was to check if your phone has microSD expansion, because that can really help when saving lots of videos and photos to your phone, and it can also make a big deal in transferring them over to other devices as well that may not have USB ports. Secondly, learn some videography, some basic photography skills. You can learn from places like Peter McKinnon, F-Stoppers, a bunch of different places like that. They're really going to give you some good information, and you actually do need to be good at photography to get the most out of your camera smartphone. So if you're a terrible photographer, this guide isn't for you. You need to go out and learn these things, and just basic things like angles, composition, framing, time of the day to shoot, anything like that. It's going to give you a lot of tips, and that's going to help and transfer over to, say, if you upgrade in the future from a phone to a full-size camera, it's going to help you there as well. So they're very universal tips, but it is something that you really need to get into your head if you're really serious about taking your photography game to the next level, because it doesn't just apply to those bigger cameras, it applies to your smartphones as well. Next up is a set of applications for Android and iOS that I recommend when taking these photos and videos. The VSCO camera is an application available at iOS and Android. It enables RAW shooting options, especially in iOS, where usually you wouldn't get those RAW shooting modes. RAW photos essentially capture a lot more information in the highlights and the shadows, and whilst those files might be 10 or 20 times the size, you're able to bring down the highlights and up the shadows to create a higher dynamic range image. So even if you think, oh, well, I'm not shooting professional photography, shooting RAW can really help when recovering that information that you may have lost by exposing incorrectly. Some phones won't support shooting RAW, such as the Galaxy Note 4 that I was testing. However, the iPhone 6s does, and you just need to look again at GSM Arena and other places that will give you good sources on what your phone camera is capable of. On Android, I recommend Open Camera, which is a really cool piece of free software that allows for plenty of different exposure controls and different settings to allow for the shot that you really want to get. It's free, and you can experiment and mess around with all the different settings and learn a bit about your camera and photography in general, whilst capturing some great photos and videos. On iOS, there aren't actually many good shooting apps that really allow you to do many settings, so again, I would recommend VSCO from earlier. It's a really good application. You can apply filters if you want, but I recommend taking those into a separate software and messing around with colors and stuff yourself, as opposed to using filters. Next, we have 3 handy editing apps that you can use on iOS and Android, and they're compatible with both when you want to actually edit your photos, when you've taken your photos and you want to edit them. You might not know this, but most photographers, in fact, I could almost say 99.9% of photographers that you see out there, like Brandon Woelfel, Peter McKinnon, anyone like that, they're definitely editing their photos a lot in some cases, and they will use tools that will help them get the most out of their images, as opposed to just shooting RAW and leaving it with that. First up is VSCO again. Wow, that's made a third appearance now. It's a really good application for getting the most out of your image. It's able to edit RAW photos, and you can, again, adjust those highlights, those shadows. You can add vignetting, you can change the colors, you can pinpoint a certain color that you want to keep and then desaturate the rest. It gives you tons of flexibility and options, and the best bit is it's free on iOS and Android. Next up is Snapseed, this time owned by Google. Does basically the same thing as VSCO with a slightly different layout, so if you really didn't like the layout of VSCO, this is something you can use. A lot of people use it because it's made by Google. I guess a bigger company is just a better peace of mind. And finally, we have Lightroom Mobile CC, which is not quite as good as the full range Lightroom, which I'll talk about in a second, but it gives you a good amount of versatility in terms of editing your photos and recomposing them and stuff like that using crops and adjustments. So I really like all three of these. If I had to give a personal recommendation, it will probably be VSCO for shooting, Snapseed for editing. And as a bonus, I recommend trying out Lightroom on your computer. You can try it for 30 days for free from adobe.com. And I really do recommend this because there are so many more tools, and this again translates to bigger cameras and other things if you decide to pursue that in the future. It allows you to change so many more settings and be a little bit more precise just because you've got that larger screen and you've got a mouse or trackpad. I really like Lightroom CC. I think it's something you should check out if you're really serious about photography. The next section is optional, but it's something I recommend. These are physical options to add or move around on your phone that will allow for some better photos and video capabilities. I started off with some super budget stuff. So I went to my local Poundland, or I guess dollar store it would be in America, and picked up this small tripod that also had a grip on the top that allowed for a smartphone. Now the tripod itself is quite useful, but it's not very well made, it's very flimsy, but the mount on top is built really well, and that means that I can put a smartphone on something like this larger tripod that I have in front of me that cost me hundreds of pounds, but it allows for a steadier shot than something that had a small tripod. I really like it. I think it's great. It cost me £1 to get this mount, and it came with a bonus tripod. It's something I really recommend if you're doing a lot of video, if your phone doesn't have optical image stabilization, as the electronic stabilization can be a little bit bad at sometimes. And because it's connected to a tripod, it allows you to mount a few other things as well. Next is a microphone. Funnily enough, both of the microphones that I decided to put in this video no longer work, but they are things that you're allowed to use. So you could use a microphone that had a jack. You can really go far and put an XLR connector on your phone, then add phantom power externally and do all these other things. But I just recommend using a 3.5mm jack and including something like a Rode video mic or something like that I have here. They're light, they're small, they connect nice and easily, and they don't require any third-party software or power. Next are these little lenses. Now, as you probably know if you've been here for a while, Blitzwolf sent these over. They are these tiny little lenses. We move over to the smaller version that I got from Wilko's in town for £3. It gives you 3 different lenses, a wide angle, a fisheye, and a macro. Now these lenses might not be the best in the world, and they're not made incredibly well, but what they enable is something you usually don't get with any other smartphone. And that is a different angle and a different look at things that you wouldn't get before. For example, the macro lens is incredibly close up, like you get incredibly close up before that thing stops focusing properly. I really like it, and the best bit is that these come in a clip, so you don't have to use them on a certain phone. You can use them on your front or rear camera, and you can use them across a bunch of different models. The Blitzwolf ones are obviously better made. They've got different clips, they're a little bit more versatile. However, the fisheye one isn't here, and all we have here is a telephoto, and they can be pretty soft in the edges. I also recommend you go out and get, again, those tripods that I mentioned earlier. You can get this little Blitzwolf one that comes with an electronic shutter, which is a shutter release. That means that when you're doing long exposures and things like that, you don't actually hit the camera, so it doesn't make a physical hit. And that means that you're less likely to get movement in the shot, which is great if you're shooting still life. You're getting a lot more for your money here because you're getting more versatility and getting that electronic shutter button. I like it a lot because it also works well as a stand if you're using it at your desk or whatever. This one's cool. It's not amazing, it's not needed, but it's just a good bonus to have with your little mobile camera kit. And finally, don't be lazy. Don't shoot in auto all the time. Some phones really do need auto to work well. For example, the Pixel works really well in auto because of its software. Other phones are going to want you to shoot in manual, in RAW, and then edit in post. Don't be lazy, do your research, and just because you've got a really cool smartphone like an iPhone 10, or a Pixel 2 XL, or a Samsung S9 Plus, or an LG V35, doesn't mean you're invincible, and doesn't mean that those cameras are going to do all the work for you. You need to put in the hours, you need to put in the effort, and you're going to get the most out of your smartphone camera. Well guys, thank you so much for watching. This has been a long one in the making, but I hopefully got the message through to you guys, and hopefully you enjoyed this video and learned something. My name's been Ryan Thomas from Failtech. Please do like, dislike, comment, and subscribe if you're new around here and never miss a video like this one. Also, please do follow my social media because that is really awesome of you guys. Also, please do follow my social media because it really does help me out. And thank you so much to my patrons for your amazing continued support. My name's been Ryan Thomas from Failtech, and I'll see you in the next video. Peace.